So in that spirit, we're going to kind of skip over a whole bunch of verses here and not cover them in depth in chapter 2.
So I hope I didn't disappoint you. Did you want to actually cover the field here?
No, it's totally fine. Because what happens, we can just bridge the gap to the verses that we want to cover here in chapter 2. King Nebuchadnezzar has a series of dreams that are very troubling to him, very disconcerting, and he has no idea what any of them mean. So he calls for his astrologers, his magicians, his wise men to come and help him. And they say, okay, we'll tell us your dream and then we'll interpret it for you. And he says, no, I'm not going to trust your interpretation unless you can tell me what my dream was, along with the interpretation. It's quite the test. And they're all looking at each other saying, I don't know anyone who can do this. And they say, this is so unusual that you're making an unreasonable demand here. And he says, fine, let's kill all of the astrologers and all of these magicians. Well, Daniel, from chapter 1, you'll remember, he had great wisdom and a way to dream dreams and interpret dreams. So when they come to collect them as part of the group that's going to be killed, he says, wait, what's going on? And he says, we can interpret this dream. We can figure this out. So you'll notice what Daniel did. He didn't just rush into the king and say, hey, I've got an answer for you. I'll tell you your dream and I'll interpret it. Because Daniel didn't know what the dream was at that point. He hadn't studied it out. He hadn't sought revelation yet. So he just goes and buys some time with the king. And then look at this critical verse 18. He asks Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So he gets Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to join him in petitioning God for a miracle here. Help us know, what is this dream? And you'll find that it becomes this little symbolic type of Christ, where he's going to get some help from heaven, perform some miraculous thing, which in the end is going to save lives. It's going to save people from death. Anything that you can do to save people from death and destruction is a type of Christ at that degree, and that's what we're seeing here. So the secret is revealed unto Daniel in a night vision, in verse 19. And so Daniel woke up and he blessed the God of heaven. So then he goes into the king and he shares with him, I'll tell you your dream. You saw a very large image, and I had a head of gold, and I had arms and a chest of silver, and I had belly and central part of its body out of brass, and I had legs of iron, and it had feet and toes of iron mixed with clay. Can you picture Nebuchadnezzar sitting there listening to this going, okay, that's exactly what I dreamed, and what in the world does this crazy image mean? And then there was a stone that came and crushed that image, ground it to pieces. And he's saying, so interpretation, what does it mean? You'll notice Daniel tells him, God has shown you in vision, Nebuchadnezzar, what he's going to do moving forward. So that head of gold, that's the kingdom of Babylon. That's you. And you're going to be overthrown by the Medes and the Persians, these two arms, these two kingdoms that are going to come together. That kingdom of silver is going to replace you, which is then going to be replaced by the Macedonians or the Greeks. Alexander the Great is going to come and go on conquest for that whole Mediterranean region. And then following him is the Roman conquest. And you're going to get the two legs. You've got Rome and Constantinople that are, in the future going to be battling for power. And then you've got all of those kingdoms at the toes that some are iron, some are clay, some are strong, some are weaker, but they're not really coalesced together. All of these kingdoms in Asia and Europe moving forward that are going to replace the Roman Empire. He just gave him not a history lesson, but a future lesson. This is what's going to happen. Now, some would be scratching their heads saying, why would God have done this to Nebuchadnezzar and for Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Why do they need to know what's in the future and all these kingdoms? And it's a really valid question. And I can't tell you why God did that. I've got some ideas, but that's all they are. Isn't it fascinating that this was not intended to be done in a corner, in secret, and don't tell anyone? It's recorded in Scripture. Do you like the fact that the Lord leaves his fingerprints throughout the history of time, where he'll do things and he'll reveal things so that when they do happen, people aren't saying, well, that was random, but rather, well, that was prophesied. It's this back to this science area. It's prove me now herewith. He's showing you over and over again that you can trust him, that he's not guessing the future. He's not predicting it. He's not rolling dice and divining what's going to happen. He knows the future. Our faith is not in a being who is stuck with mortal perceptions of, well, we have a really good feeling about how we think things are trending at this point, but rather, I'll tell you exactly what's going to happen and in what order. And that's provides more of a firm foundation for my faith today, to see in the history of time how God reveals certain things, they come to pass, so that when our prophets stand at the pulpit today and give us prophecies or give us direction, we don't have to scratch our head and say, I wonder if he's accurate. I wonder to what degree I can trust what he just said.
And what I love also what's going on here is Daniel had been trained in all the best learning and science of the Babylonians. He was very well educated. When you're at the king's court, being an astrologer or a scientist, like, you had access to all the best records. I mean, it turns out archaeologists have now found these massive libraries from ancient Assyria, ancient Babylon, and these people had incredible universities, if I can use that term, where there were people who were trained to understand how the world worked. And here's Daniel, who knew a lot. He knew how to interpret dreams and to understand the stars. And yet, in this case, he didn't know the answer. Even with all his training, he did not simply and only rely on the wisdom of the world. Well, the wisdom of the world is not always bad. It's very helpful many times. But he turns to God and says, I'm in a situation where my wisdom gets me here, and I need you, Lord, to bridge the gap to get me to a higher plane. And God gives the revelation. So there's multiple lessons I think we can draw out of here that we should learn from our experiences and experiences of others to be wise. And when we don't have wisdom, we always need to be turning to God. And I also appreciate that God, he gives us a way of understanding how he works in history. Now, of course, he uses signs and symbols that made a lot of sense to the people back then culturally. And guess what? If we roll the clock forward 2,000 years from now, people might say, why are they always talking about basketball and sports metaphors in general conference? Well, because we try to speak in ways that make sense to people at that time. And so this metaphor and this dream that's happening for the king of Babylon makes a lot of sense to these people in that time. And it's clear for them to see that, yeah, statues are a symbol of solidarity. They're often representing a God who's immovable and who preserves a kingdom. And the fact that it gets knocked out by a stone carved without hands is very, very telling, because the image itself has to be carved by hands. And what do we learn in Genesis? We are God's image. So there's something going on with this stone, that God is involved in knocking out human-created solutions. Not that they're bad, but ultimately it's God's kingdom, his revealed kingdom, that is the totality of all truth that we aspire to have in our lives.